So we are coming to the end of our time together as the RSCM course this year. And it gives me tremendous pleasure to be able to welcome our guest composer for this year's festival, David Hurd, who needs no real announcement because he is so extraordinarily well known around the place and has contributed so much to church music, not just in the USA, but really throughout the world. And it gives me a tremendous honor for me just to spend a little time with you, David, to talk a little bit about you and obviously the piece you've proposed, and maybe a little bit about what happens to David Hurd in the future. Well, I think we'll all be eager to know that. So welcome. Thank you so much for spending the time with us.
Well, thank you. Thank you for this invitation.
So I'm going to jump straight in, if that's all right. We are going to be performing your piece as people see this, probably an hour or so after this interview. So your thoughts and your aspirations will be with everyone. But I want to go back to childhood with you. And I'm assuming it's childhood, but like all of us, I think, there was some aha moment in our early lives where we thought, I think this is what I'm going to be. Or I'm very curious about this. Can you tell me a little bit about that? And then if you had an aha moment?
Well, I'm a cradle Episcopalian. I was practically born in an Episcopal church. And from my earliest childhood memories are outside of the house, were going to church and going to my grandparents' house. And church was the first place I heard live music. And I loved it. From before I was able to understand anything that was going on verbally, I certainly found the music appealing. I loved the sound of the organ. I loved the sound of the choir. I loved the pageantry. I loved the stained glass windows. The whole environment spoke to me. And I mentioned my grandparents' house because there were two pianos in that house, and there were a lot of people who played the keyboards. And from early on, I thought, I want to be one of those people who plays the keyboards. But it was really the organ in church that I loved. My favorite part of every service was at the end when I was able to run across the chancel and up through the chapel and stand next to the organ console and watch the postlude.
And was it at that church where you first got to experience playing the organ? You're really quite renowned as a player, but also a great improviser. So was it your first experience there?
Well, actually, my first time touching that organ console, probably about 10 years old or so, and by that time we had moved to a different parish, but somehow that parish, St. Philip's Church in the Bedford-Stuyvesant section of Brooklyn, has been my ancestral parish, and I still have family who attend that parish. So and they've changed the organ since then. It's a different instrument now, but I've been twice invited to play on the new organ as well. So my relationship to the parish does continue.
Oh, that's terrific. So I was just looking at sort of your earlier years in high school, and we constantly want to make sure that our youth are experiencing music, be it instrumental music, church music, choral music, whatever. You seem to have a remarkable opportunity when you attended the High School of Music and the Art in New York. It seems like something I would have loved to have gone to had I had the opportunity myself. Could you just tell, for those of the high schoolers that may be listening in here, what was that experience like, and how is that unique to what you see in education today?
Well, actually, I would have to start a little bit before high school because I went to a junior high school which had an extraordinary music department. A band program, a string program, and 3 choral teachers. I became involved in all of those activities when I was in junior high, and in fact had a relationship with the chair of that music department that extended beyond my high school years. I worked with him as a choral accompanist And so he became one of my mentors well beyond junior high school years. But I played in the band and I sang in choruses and accompanied and whatever. And so that sort of oriented me. And then I went to the High School of Music and Art, which was an extraordinary school. It was a strong academic school as well as with specialization in visual arts as well as in music, and it was wonderful to be at the highest age in high school age with so many uh, uh, other students who had my same interests, and we felt that we were special, and we had a very special experience, and to have that at that age where there's so many competing uh, agendas and so many things that one can become involved in, to be able to specialize, if you will, even in at the high school level. And I had I was attending the Juilliard School preparatory division at the same time. So I was having a sort of pre-conservatory experience in multiple places at the same time, and as well as singing in a parish choir.
Yeah, I mean, it just sounds like a fantastic opportunity, and obviously it's a very helpful building block to get into a career. Now, so New York is, as we all know, a very busy and vibrant place, and you find yourself in Oberlin, which is probably uh, a different sort of social and experience. How did that sort of work for you? And what were your qualifications there? What were you sort of majoring in? And obviously from that you were going to go on to your next steps in education and profession.
Well, certainly at the time, I mean, I was going into college in the late 1960s, and that was at that particular time, especially, Oberlin was very well positioned for organ instruction in terms of it was a large department, very well equipped, magnificent collection of instruments. And a critical mass of students that I kind of thought was wonderful. I had studied organ at the Juilliard in the preparatory division with a wonderful teacher, Bronson Reagan, but in all truth, at that time, the instruments there were not ideal, and I felt at the time, just sort of instinctively, that one learns a lot about the organ by playing instruments. The instruments teach you a great amount, and so Oberlin became a focus. Very early on, as I read about the school and its history and its new buildings and its wonderful instruments. So I went there with lots of excitement to major in organ, carrying along, obviously my love of church music and love of choral music. But one could only, concentrate on so many things at a time. So things like composition and choral music were secondary during those years. Although I did sing in the college choir, and Robert Fountain, who was a wonderful choral director, I didn't study privately with him, but I certainly learned a tremendous amount of about choral direction and about choral singing and the joy of choral music in that context.
Great. Well, it's as a concert organist, of course, you are very well known, and that was in your early life. Really, as you've just said, your primary focus. We're going to come on to your compositions a little bit later on, but I just want to sort of look at two very significant parts of your contribution to the world of church music. You spent 28 years, I think it was, at General Theological Seminary. And you have been quite honored by other seminaries around the country for your work in that sort of area of church music. Now, I and many others who will be listening to this interview are sort of church musicians within parishes. So there's a parallel track there, I think, or maybe you're going to correct me on that. But how would you describe the sort of the 28 years that you spent at GTS? What do you think was in your mind to be able to help steward young clergy into a very sort of dynamic environment and very different dynamics depending on where you were in parishes, to be able to sort of position music in an informed way inside a parish environment?
Well, actually, I was at General Seminary for 39 years.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I started there in 1976 and left in 2015. So it was really quite a major chunk of my professional life. And in 1976. The Episcopal Church and much of the Anglican world was experiencing a lot of change in terms of ritual life, prayer book revision, hymnal explosion was going on, and also, I mean, 1976 was the year of the General Convention that first authorized the ordination of women to the priesthood. And so there was a tremendous demographic change going on, theological exploration and liturgical change. And so it was a very exciting time to plug into what was happening at a seminary liturgically. And General had a very rich liturgical pattern. We sang the evening office 4 times a week. We sang the morning office twice a week. We sang the Eucharist at least twice a week. The chapel life was the backbone of the institutional experience, and it was a residential school, so that the faculty and the students were, the majority of them lived right on the block, and so it was very intense life. Some described it as being almost semi-monastic, and but the intensity of worship and of musical experience was enormous. In my first 3 years at General, I was also working in a parish. And in fact, most of the 39 years that I was at the seminary, I also had a parallel experience in a parish. And the two complemented one another to a great extent. For example, at the seminary, initially at least, there was a fierce opposition to choral music. The entire community wanted to do all the singing all the time. And that was wonderful in certain ways. It meant robust hymn singing, robust psalm singing, not always what you'd like to necessarily hear on a recording, but nonetheless robust and enthusiastic, and an opportunity to teach those things. We sang a tremendous amount of plain song and Anglican chant, and we never had nearly enough rehearsal of it for the amount of performance time, but nonetheless, it was always a work in progress, and as such, I think a very good modeling opportunity for those who would be clergy. And now many are bishops, priests, deacons, cardinal rectors, and rural rectors. But throughout the church, serving congregations of all sorts, and that was again a stretching experience. I mean, I had to. Students came from everywhere and were going to everywhere. And so every dimension of the church was in some sort of way represented in the student body, and in terms of their prior musical experiences, in terms of their anticipated future musical experiences. It was an opportunity to write, to direct, to teach, and over the course of time, I did build in a choral element, which did parallel the community singing, and so it was very rich, and then it was always informed by my work in the parish, and then also in work. So there was a reciprocal benefit, I think, to both aspects.
I can imagine that being a very rich experience of finding new people, and as you said, going to very diverse parts of the priesthood and serving in very different styles of parish and place. So that's very enriching. Now, is that the time also where you really started to find your wings as a composer, and was much of your composing to do around liturgies that were associated with the seminary, or were you really was that a separate track?
Well, again, I would want to back up just slightly before my time at the seminary. One pivotal moment, I think, for me was between Berlin and General Seminary. I spent a year as Larry King's assistant at Trinity Church, Wall Street. And that was a very special year. And again, Larry was one of those people in one of those places who had the opportunity and the skills and the resources to be creative at a time that there was a need for new music, for new words that were coming into the liturgy. And in lots of ways, his example in the early 70s sort of gave me permission to try my own wings as a composer. And Calvin Hampton was across the island over at Calvary Church doing monstrously creative things there. And he, Calvin and Larry King were close friends, and they sort of, I was kind of like the kid brother in a way. They were both very encouraging to me and very, as I say, they encouraged me to do what I could do. And at one point, when I had my own position up at the Church of the Intercession, I asked Larry if I could use one of his settings to the then relatively new Rite 2 words of the Eucharist, and Larry said, absolutely not. You need to write your own. You need to do that, and the church needs for you to do that. And so you may not use my setting. I want to see yours. And I thought that was a fantastic bit of teaching there. I mean, he just threw me into the deep end of the pond in a certain sort of way. And I appreciated that. And in the end, he actually used my setting at Trinity some of the time, which was one of the highest compliments I could have asked at that time.
I'm sure you denied him at least 3 times that he could use it.
Well, actually, he reproached me harshly for writing so many notes. Okay. I don't want to play that every week.
Well, that's a fantastic names, and that sort of just creates the line of musicians and composers that work in the church. And it's lovely to see how this through line comes through your life. Now, there is another part of your contribution to the Episcopal Church, which is the 1982 hymnal. And when I was in London, I was involved in not such an august hymn book project, but it was one. And it was quite interesting the sort of the inherent tensions that may be there when you say, okay, we're gonna write a hymnal. There's a load of stuff from the past, and there's a load of stuff that needs to be in the future. And often, and at that time, as you're saying, texts and fresh texts and contemporary texts were needed. Just explain a little bit about your work in the production of the hymnal, and maybe what are the considerations that had to sort of the starting ground rules, if you like, and maybe some of those tensions, if they existed. But I'll just let you talk on that a little bit.
Well, yes, I was very honored to be asked to join the Standing Commission on Church Music back in, I guess, beginning in 1977, was shortly after I went to the seminary. And the big task of the commission, which was appointed by the National Church, was to, at that point, pursue the process of revising the hymnal. We didn't really have the charge to actually do the revision yet, but for 3 years, the preliminary work was to be pushed forward, and in fact, a lot of that had already begun. The commission was a wonderful bunch of people. Alec Whiten served as the coordinator. And in many ways, he was one of the main sort of guides to the process. But the commission included seminary professors, parish clergy, musicians, and it was a wonderful opportunity for us all to. I mean, one of the issues is that church, we all work hours, so we don't always know what others are doing, and it was a tremendous forum for us to gather the national wisdom of the Episcopal Church experience in music and liturgy, and not only the experience but also the academic wisdom, and then to also be able to carry that back to the places where we worked, many of us in seminaries, and so it was a tremendous learning experience, and the process as we approached the revision of the 1940 hymnal was very systematic, and it involved first a thorough assessment of the 1940 hymnal. A page, stanza by stanza, phrase by phrase, assessment of the music and the texts. There was a theological committee set to really sort of say, is this what the church really believes? Is this the best way to say that? Is this poetry really of such dignity that it really should not be tampered with? Or are these words, should we really rethink them? Is this the best music? What has happened in the last 40 years musically in the life of the church that shows the activity of the Spirit? Where are we going? And the prophetic aspect of if there's going to be a new book, should it just document the past, or should it sort of convey us into the future? And of course, all those things are highly subjective, but there are ways, I think, to approach them systematically and thoughtfully and respectfully. We did have a few moments in the course of the 9 years I was on the commission where there were some heated conversations. But it was, I have to say, even in the heated moments, it was done in a lot of love and mutual respect amongst us, but but even beyond that, respect for the larger life of the church, and the way in which what we were doing was a reflection of a trajectory of the faith community, and that we couldn't possibly guess its future, but we certainly could ride the momentum that we were able to perceive in the life of the church. And
Wow, that sounds as though it was a very, very healthy experience, and
oh, it really was.
so that's
Uh,
fascinating
it
to hear
was
that.
sort of my continuing education as I helped others with their continuing education.
So now, look, in an hour or so, we are going to perform your piece, "The Spirit of the Lord." And this, again, the theme for the RSCM course this year is the Spirit's Tether. So you've tethered those nicely together. Just talk a little bit about what your initial thoughts are. Obviously, the text is for those who love Elgar is very well known,
Yes.
but also how you have approached this. And I've come to know this piece pretty well now in my own. Well, I hope I've come to know it pretty well. But there are some tremendous sort of elements of both forward-looking and things from the past that inform this piece and shape it. So I just talk about your process here a little bit.
Well, I was happy to have this text presented to me for a setting. It's a very rich and wonderful text, and the lectionary sort of gives it an Advent focus in lots of places, but it certainly works in any number of contexts, and in a Pentecost context, I think has a rich resonance, and the Spirit as a factor in the life of the church is constant and ever present, and so it's when I began to think about writing it, I was sort of writing a piece on this text. I was a little bit overwhelmed, and I started down a path that was not going where I wanted it to go, and I thought I need to take a break from this process and just see what Spirit is saying, and somehow the relationship of the Veni Creator chant seized me, and I kind of thought this may seem like an obvious reference here, but maybe it's my way in to experiencing the multi levels of this text, and so I let Venator expand my thoughts about the text, and there are two sections in the piece that are kind of almost like chaconne-like, because there's a sort of an unlikely chord progression that it repeats, and I was hoping that the chord progression wouldn't seem to be too abstruse and unlikely, but that in fact it goes to surprising places, and yet I hope that those places where it goes, when it arrives there, you feel a lift that, oh, that's where we're headed. And then now we're headed someplace else, and in some sort of way, that's the Spirit blowing as it will, one and logically, but necessarily expectedly. And I suppose that was part of what was going on in my thinking.
Yeah, no, and I'd say having sort of again lived with a little bit now, that the unexpected is not, it's there as it's a pleasant journey to the unexpected. It's not as off we've just gone this way, but also the fact that this very ancient theme sort of undergirds all that is being built off that. And as a cradle Catholic and brought up in the Latin Mass,
Yes.
just being reminded of how timeless plain song melody can be, and how adaptable it can be, and then how evocative it is. Even if you don't necessarily recognize it, you understand its inherent sort of musical DNA. So I think the piece is terrific, and
Thank you so much.
And at this time now, of course, there'll be a lot of nodding folks at the RSCM who have, whilst we're talking a week before we started rehearsing it, will also see that this is a tremendous addition to the repertoire of the church.
And I also wanted to give the organists something to do, and so the constant murmuring of the organ behind all of this. The sea of 16th notes might look a little frightening, but I don't think it really is terribly fierce. It basically just murmurs behind the whole thing.
And Tom and I did no justice to it the other day, putting down a piano track for folks to sort of just have a background. But yes, it's going to sound absolutely, the murmuring, as you say, will just sort of sit there. And in the cathedral, I think the building will not amplify that murmur, but it will murmur back. So I think it's a masterful piece of writing, and I think we're all very lucky to be given the privilege of performing it for the first time.
Well, it'd be my great honor to hear it sung in such a splendid place by such splendid musicians. So thank you very much for your work.
Not at all. And look, so we're sort of coming to the end of our time a little bit together. It's been terrific hearing about where David Hurd started, and spending a little time just getting to talk with you, those that don't maybe know you or have met you before, just get to see how a journey can provide so much influence to the lives that we all lead in church music, and the inspiration that you provide. So on the word inspiration, I have a question for you. You still have some years in the business to go, but as we look to the younger generations of church musicians, what do you think are the key inspirations that you would hope for them, maybe in 2020 now, where we are, as opposed to where you and I may have been back in the 70s and 60s? What do you think these young musicians should be looking out for and making sure that they absorb early on?
That's a very difficult question to address, because I was just thinking the other day that I'm not sure I knew what I was asking for when I thought I'd pursue the path that I have ended up on. There was always a thought in the back of my mind that from my beginnings experiencing church music, that I would do church music. I would play the organ. I would be immersed in some sort of combination of these activities. I would be involved in singing and choral music, and how it came together is a mystery to some extent, of the way things happen. Although when I think about it, my image of what life as a church musician was going to be when I was 20 years old, well, the church is not that institution, because the dynamics of the church really is a moving target. and careers, we make our decisions, we build our hopes on and set our projections as to what we would like to do based upon the data we have at the time when we were young, and our zeal and idealism, and oftentimes targets, and so what we all require is the agility, I think, to rise to the moment, to be available to what the opportunities lead us to. I'm confident that there'll be music to be made, and that those who are attuned to the process will find that music. I'm hopeful and confident that there will be such people. I realize that my own career path has gone in some ways rather differently than what I might have predicted in mid-20s. And I, I think I do regret some things I have not done, but I don't regret anything that I have done to some extent, except that maybe I haven't been able to do as much of it as I would have liked to. And the hope that there will be time in the future to fill in some of those gaps.
So before I talk about the future, I just want to maybe just lead on from this question of mine to, as we look to the future, organizations like the RSCM are critical to the growth and maintaining the standard of church music, and I hope with all our work together to enhance it. You have sort of lived a life alongside a little bit the RSCM and within it. What do you think are the most important things for the what do you acknowledge as the RSCM's most significant work, and maybe if there was advice along similar lines to the RSCM or the others who lead church music, what do we need to keep an eye on? What do we need to maintain? Is it a back to basics sort of approach, or are there things that you think as you look ahead, there's a trajectory that, as you were with the hymnal in some respects, wanting to influence the future?
Well, one of the things that, on a very basic level, I think the RSCM has been so instrumental in having people make music. I mean, that's just such a basic thought. But we are in a time where the making of music has, to a great degree, been, how should I say, outsourced to certain people who do that, or to technology. And the recent pandemic has certainly been a very interesting time, because it has made us use technology to make music that we would not have been able to do otherwise. Now, to emerge from this time back to where we don't have to make music virtually, will be an interesting transition, and I hope one that will be embraced enthusiastically by those of us who have sung with headphones on, into a microphone, and seen our co-musicians in little boxes on a screen. It's just been wonderful to be able to do that, and now to be able to get to move beyond that. Music education generally, particularly in America, has been so attenuated over the last several decades. And so initiatives like the RSCM are just so critical in keeping the making of music an opportunity that's accessible by people, and modeling the joy of making music. Churches that have choral programs hopefully will embrace those programs and enhance them and further encourage them, and not allow them to be completely overtaken by produced electronic studio music. And with all due respect to those who do that work, I think the access to the making of music and the aesthetic and spiritual benefit of that activity is something that cannot be reproduced by sitting and listening to sound coming from speakers.
And I completely agree. I mean, the one thing yes, we've all been on headphones, as you say, but actually now more recently, just getting back into a room and making music with musicians, there's just something in the air. It's just something that just is so special that I agree and pray that it will never be replaced by an easier technological option.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for your time. Before we go, what's next for David Hurd? What musical mountains are there to climb, or beaches to stroll across?
Well, it's again hard to predict the future. I have some projects right now, mostly choral, and not huge oratorios or operas, but significant things to keep the energies going. The pandemic period has been in some ways a sabbatical. I continue my direction of music at the Church of St. Mary the Virgin, Times Square, and I'm looking forward to reassembling our octet and singing with them, and the energy that is produced around working with musicians and the creativity that draws forth. I'm looking forward to re-embracing that. But the time that I've had in the last year by myself to practice, to think about music, it's I don't know where that's going to go, but it's been its own sort of blessing to have this time out, and now I'm looking forward to time in again.
Yeah. David Hurd, it has been a complete pleasure and honor to spend some time with you. On behalf of the RSCM, again, thank you so much for the inspirational piece of Spirit of the Lord, which we are now literally just about to go and do, and very excited to do so. Thank you so much for all you've given to us church musicians: inspiration, forward thinking, tremendous creativity, and just a really nice man to boot as well. So thank you
Well,
so much.
Thank you so much for your wonderful work.
And thank you. And we'll look forward to doing a post-mortem on the other side of Evensong. But for now, thank you. It's great to see you, and I hope we can connect up again soon, maybe not via Zoom.
I hope so.
David Hurd, thanks so much.
Thank you.